Hi, everybody. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I am today back in our house in Michigan after a bunch of time on the road. I'm not sure how many of these I did from the road, but I was on the road. Anyway, today, let's see, I am answering yet another in the question or the Q&A for Freelancers series. This one is, I don't have the exact phrasing, but it's basically like, should I advertise my services as a freelancer? And I think there was something in there. I don't have the exact phrasing, but I think there was something in there about like Google advertising. Should you advertise on Google? But like, I'm going to address the subject of advertising in general as a freelancer. So should you, as a freelancer, is a service provider. So should you, as a service provider, um, advertise? And this is a pretty simple one for me. I would say almost certainly not. There could always be edge cases, exceptions, what have you, but it is hard for me to imagine that going well. And I'm going to get into why that is. And then maybe like what could you do that would make it worthwhile to advertise? So when you go freelance, maybe you've been, a lot of people watching would be software engineers. But if you're what I'll call a technician of some kind, so maybe you're a writer or a designer, probably a knowledge worker, but somebody who is doing a job like labor in some capacity. I think of a laborer as a technician, like you have a craft of some kind, and there are elements of that craft that you become good at. There's a book called The E-Myth or The E-Myth Revisited, where the author of that book categorizes people as or personality elements of people as like technician, manager, or entrepreneur. And the technician is the person or the part of you that really likes doing the thing that you do. The manager is somebody who is kind of tasked with like keeping the business running, and the entrepreneur is the visionary that makes big deals and creates businesses and stuff. And the idea is that each of those three personas exist within each of us, just in different proportions. But people who go freelance often tend to be technician heavy. They just get tired of technicianing at a 9-to-5 job, and they want a technician for themselves. So the author of this book calls this, I think, an entrepreneurial seizure, that you're working, as a software engineer, and you're like, hey, my boss is stupid. Dilbert is right. I could do this so much better. I'm going to quit. I'm going to write software the way I think it should be written, and so on and so forth. This is the technician mindset. And whatever kind of technician you are, when you go off and you freelance as a technician, usually you're doing this as some kind of generalist. So, I am a software engineer. Even if you say that you're like a Rails software engineer, that's still a generalist software engineer. You might be a generalist graphic designer or a generalist whatever. That's a lot of setup. Why am I talking about all this? Well, imagine advertising generalist services. So what exactly are you going to do as a Rails software engineer? So you're a Rails software engineer, just like literally probably 3 million others. When you go to advertise, like what does that look like exactly? Are you going to pay to advertise for the term Rails software engineer? Are you going to go on some site with millions of readers and pay them to say that you're a Rails software engineer? Because you know what, there's probably other people that would also pay for that, and not to mention probably like large application development firms that you would be competing with. That is to say, the advertising you would do as a generalist, you're going to be competing with large firms that offer that sort of service. So that advertising is going to be quite expensive. It would be sort of like if you decided you wanted to become a plumber, and this isn't as much of a thing these days, but for those of you who remember the yellow pages, like you go and you open the yellow pages to plumber, and if you paid a lot of money, you could have a giant ad right at the front of the section. You're going to be competing with the plumber that has the kind of money to pay for that ad, and you probably don't as a newly minted freelancer. So in any venue that you would advertise your freelance services, you can almost certainly bet that somebody has beaten you there and has a lot more money and is going to outcompete you. So in the first place, it's kind of futile. Um, in the second place, like let's assume that you did find a little corner of the world where you could successfully advertise that you had hung out your shingle, so you were paying some money to get in front of people. So let's go back to this Ruby on Rails developer. You've paid to be advertised somewhere, maybe in a local user group. you get in front of people that are like, hey, I need a Rails developer. Well, what you've done is you've essentially recreated the job interview paradigm. They're searching for kind of a generalist laborer. You say, hey, I'm a generalist laborer. There's a well-established pattern in society for that kind of thing, and it is the job interview process. Now, imagine the rate of success that the average laborer has at applying for jobs. It's not very good. So you're paying, to get in front of however many people. And each time, especially in certain venues, like it'll be pay per click. In a lot of cases, meaning each time somebody clicks, you part with a fair bit of money. And now imagine if each time you part with that fair bit of money, you have like a 1 in 20 chance of actually landing any business. So that becomes even more expensive. Not only is it expensive to be listed there to advertise, it's compoundingly expensive because it's not going to be very effective. Now, let's say that you actually manage to succeed in some of this, and you're run through the RFP process that ensues when they find you. So they weigh you against all the other Rails developers, and they decide you're the one that they go with. Now, who do you think has the upper hand, let's call it, in that relationship? You've positioned yourself as a commodity. They have weighed you against a bunch of other commodities and graced you with their business that they have chosen you. They are kind of the arbiter of what is good and what isn't in Rails developers, and they've decided you are the one that they're going to go with. Do you think that relationship is one of equals or peers? No, it's going to look like a boss and a subordinate. Now, a lot of that, if you're especially, if you're new, that might not sound so bad. I mean, except the expensive part, but it'll wear on you over the course of time of being a freelancer. You don't want relationships that just recreate the boss-employee relationship and you're just doing it more often. You want to build leverage and equity in your business. You want to build a practice. You want to become known and have better and better pieces of business. And none of that happens if you are positioning yourself as a commodity answering requests for proposals. So that's kind of all my take on why, oh no, my light went out. Oh, well, whatever. That's kind of all my take on why I wouldn't advertise as a freelancer. Are there cases where you could maybe do it and have it work? Sure, I suppose if you found somewhere that potential buyers hung out, that nobody was really there advertising and you did it, it might be worthwhile. So I can't definitively say it wouldn't work, but I sure wouldn't advise any freelancer to look at paid advertising as a source of business. It's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So when might it make sense? Advertising tends to, in my experience, work better when you're maybe doing something at more scale. So if you actually make it a point to develop a commodity offering, instead of you being the commodity offering, maybe you write a book or you create some kind of training info product or course or something along those lines that supplements your freelance practice. So if you're, again, this Rails developer and maybe you're helping set up a lot of websites for people that cut hair, let's say, you could also look at developing how to do it yourself guide for barbershops to set up their own websites, and then you could sell that book for, I don't know, $89 or something like that, and then you could go and find certain venues to advertise. Like you go and find out like what kind of publications do barber shop owners read, and you put up some advertising in there and you say, hey, I have this book that you can go buy, or you could even advertise your services there, I suppose. I'll get to the idea of niching or specializing in a moment, but when you have a commodity offering, advertising, as long as the economics work out right, can work better for that, because if you're advertising your services as an application developer, you're only going to be able to like fulfill one of those orders, so to speak, per quarter or per year. So the second you get a business hit, you either take down the ad or you're kind of losing money because you have this ad up and you're going to tell everybody like, hey, I'm busy. I have a 40-hour-a-week contracting engagement. Whereas if you have, a book or an info product, something that you can sell that you've already created, then as many people can buy that and you can get as many purchases as people see the ad, conceivably. So if you have something that is more of a commodity that you can offer, but also, I should probably crucially say, it's usually going to work better if you have more capacity to fulfill it. So if it's a book you've written, there's kind of infinite capacity, but maybe you've developed an offering that you can pull off in 2 hours or something, like a productized service. Like what Hit Subscribe does, writing blog posts. We have a lot of capacity to do that. So if we were advertising for the writing of blog posts, we wouldn't hit this problem where as soon as there was business, we had to stop. So advertise when you have something that's a commodity, advertise when you can fulfill it a bit more scale, and or advertise once you've specialized. So I mentioned a Rails developer that starts to specialize in building websites for barbershops. Well, it starts to become less important that this person is a Rails developer. So they're starting to get more out of the commodity world and more into the world of their buyers. Like I service this kind of special buyer. Once you've identified a niche, once you've identified a buyer, the cost to advertise comes way down because you're not just kind of spraying to all fields, as they say in baseball. You're able to figure out a lot more targeted fashion how to get in front of the kind of people that you want to work with. And you start to have a much better conversion rate. So imagine you're this Rails developer and you're like, hey, I make websites for literally anyone with money. Where do you go and advertise that? And to what effect? Are you going to put that in like Time magazine? Who cares? Like, no, your conversion rate from that is going to be atrocious. That people are, what, for every, 100,000 people that read Time magazine, maybe there's like one CTO that's like, oh, cool, a Rails developer. Whereas if you are building websites for barbershops, then you can advertise in like trade periodicals, and you know that like the overwhelming majority of people that are reading that might be interested in your services. So once you've niched, once you've kind of narrowed your focus, you're raising the odds of success. The other thing that website build for barbershops does, by doing that over and over again, you're getting more efficient at that, so you can do more of those. Going back to the kind of capacity discussion, if you're building websites for barbershops, maybe you have this template, like you get so good at that, you could bang out like 3 of them in a day. So it gets, more efficient as well. You can take a lot of orders. So I think that, that specializing, getting more productized or building, some kind of SaaS or what have you, as you start to diversify your offerings, hopefully you're doing that, and move away from just kind of trading or like doing kind of commodity labor. Once you start to have kind of a specialty, an area of expertise, more focused target market, then advertising starts to make sense. And then you can start to do some, very deliberate return on investment math, like, okay, I'm going to advertise in this barbershop owner's trade publication. I estimate that gets, 1,000 readers a month. If 1 in 100 of them converted to giving me a phone call and I were able to, convince like 1 in 10 of those to give me business, that would be 1 piece of business per month. Sure, that's 1 piece of business per month is worth, the $500 a month advertising fee. So you can start to more easily do math like that compared to if you say, I'm going to go and advertise, for Rails developer, for anybody that types Ruby on Rails into the search engine. I don't know what the cost per click of that's going to be. I don't know how many people are going to be above me. I hope that, some people click through to page 3 where my thing might be, and then how many of those people are actually going to, it starts to get really hard to reason about. If you're more focused and you're more specialized, and you understand who would be taking you up on this advertising and why, it gets a lot easier to make hypotheses about whether this advertising is worth it, and then test and measure that as you go. So yeah, that's my take on whether you should advertise or not. A lot of what I said at the end there is getting into a little more like intermediate to advanced business owner territory. If you're just hanging out your shingle and all that was confusing, I would say the takeaway is don't advertise. Don't try to acquire business that way. Use your personal network. If you got to, like, go on Upwork. I think I've talked before. I'll link to a video on YouTube. That wouldn't be how I would acquire business. But if you have to pay the mortgage in the early going, and I would say going on Upwork is better than trying to advertise. So in the beginning, yeah, don't advertise. Find business in other ways. There are plenty of ways to do it. I could cover that in another video. I'd steer clear of it. Once you've gotten your sea legs and you start to have more of a specialty, more expertise, more recognition, that's when you might start to think about advertising. So hopefully that helps the person that asked that question and others besides, and I'll catch you next time.